Run. Is it time? Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cove in sunny Dartmouth. I'm Sherry Scully. I'm the Executive Director of the Cove Workforce Initiative here at Cove. And I'm here with three guests today to talk about how to safely operate an ocean tech facility in the presence of COVID-19. And of course, this conversation is going to go well beyond social distancing and hand washing and so on. I'm here with three guests who are all experts in health and safety, who are going to share some advice, some do's and don'ts, and some great ideas around how to re-engage employees and get people back to work safely in this new abnormal that we're currently living in. And in the spirit of getting people back to work safely, we're actually all here together in person, and we are situated 6 feet apart, even if the angles might not suggest that. But we are safely socially distanced, and we're here to have a great conversation. My guests today are Marc-Andre Lavoie. He's an industrial hygienist with Risk Marker Inc., just to my right. Beside him is Stacey Wiper, who's the Director of Health, Safety, and Environment for Irving Shipbuilding. And to his right is James McKee, who is the Director of Human Resources with Maritime Systems. And James actually just joined his company, I believe, 4 months ago. So about a month of normalcy before the chaos erupted. So thank you all for joining me here today. And I'm looking forward to a really great conversation. I'd like to start off today's discussion with a question to Marc-Andre, because before COVID-19, I must confess I'd never heard of the term industrial hygienist. It's a brand new one to me. I wonder if you could start off just describing what an industrial hygienist does, what that role is, and how you can play a role in business strategy and operations.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, you might never heard about it ever again, but it's not a profession that comes very often, but it's a very important profession. It covers, when you look at occupational health and safety, it's the specialist, the science specialist in the health part of health and safety. So basically, it's a science dedicated to ensuring minimal health impact of workplace to the workers, but also to the surrounding public issues. Yes.
Great.
And I think you were mentioning.
I'm going to share a slide here.
Yes. Like in simple terms, there's been like it's not a very known profession, but I believe it's a very important one. And there's been studies that's been done about the business value of implementing good industrial hygiene practices. And the model is pretty simple, and it's all the studies that's been done on it come to the same result. If you perform good occupational health, if you perform good occupational health, you will end up with a healthy workforce, and a healthy workforce will increase your productivity, which will also increase your business performance, and that will create a strong economy. And some countries have been very strong about this model, especially in the UK. If you go to in England, you will find big signs: protect your hearing, don't breathe crystalline silica dust, and things like that. So it's a profession that is on the growth because it's good for workplaces and it's good for society.
Yeah, and I think that message is becoming more clear to businesses, especially in light of the COVID-19 situation. I'd like to take a bit of a retrospective look at the situation that we're currently in. About 3.5 months ago, we went from status quo and life as normal to within a few days, really, things went to completely a different situation at work. And Stacey, maybe start us off with just describe what that first week was like, and where you really felt the sore points from this sudden change.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that long ago, but it's the March 23rd timeframe, right? I can almost remember it vividly. Well, I can remember it vividly, right? I would say, if you look at what was the situation and what the challenge, right? I'd cover the situation first. I think the situation for us at that time, sort of that first week, and it got progressively higher each week, was the apprehension. Right, and we talked about people's comfort level, right? It varies, right? And so people's apprehension went from a scale of 0 to 10, or 0 to 1,000. And that was the situation. How do you manage that level of apprehension, that comfort level, right? By the nature of what we do, right? We build ships and we repair ships, big, large warships, right? So, with all the things that came out in that first couple of weeks, how do we? The situation was we work in confined spaces, we work in enclosed spaces, we work in very close proximity with a lot of people, right? That was the situation we had in front of us. How do we do? What do we do there, right? Social media, it's always there, right? Social media is just information overload, bombards people, bombards us. How do we manage all that messaging and the deconfliction of that messaging, right, to what we need to continue what we were doing, right? And I think James and I spoke earlier, but we were determined by the province, to be a critical infrastructure, or by the terms essential service, right? And so the workforce, everyone else closing, ceasing operations, and so we had to message, how do we educate our workforce that we're allowed to be open? We're essential service and critical infrastructure, and that was articulated in the health order, right? So how do we message that back and forth with our workforce, right? I mean, that was the situation. In terms of the challenges that you talked about, I'd say the changing nature of it. Every day, every minute, every second, every hour, things were changing. I say, extraordinary times, extraordinary measures, and when I look at that and say, when you see governments making legislation on the fly, all right, that's a signal. That tells you this is an extremely dynamic situation. How do you keep up, right? And then the other main challenge for us was we wanted our workforce, we wanted the community, the province, our company, everyone, we wanted them to see us not trying to follow measures, follow mitigation. We really, our president, our leadership made a conscious decision. We wanted to lead it. So if it hadn't been done from a mitigation, we wanted to do it. So that was a challenge, right? How do we stay ahead of something that was so fast and always demonstrating that we're trying to do something more? That was a challenge. And,
yeah. And it was changing so quickly, wasn't it? It wasn't, day by day, but even hour by hour. There were new announcements and new restrictions, and then trying to manage a workforce amidst all that uncertainty, right?
In my previous career, I had a lot of international experience and natural disasters and all sorts of things. I can only remember one particular time in my previous career where I've seen such a situation evolving so fast. I can't remember being part of something so dynamic and so rapid. I really can't.
Yeah. Great, thanks, Stacey. James, how about from your perspective? I mean, again, as someone who is fairly new to an organization, you didn't have a whole lot of time to really even assess what normal was or what status quo was. But where did you really see an impact on kind of your operations and on your day-to-day practice?
So a lot of it was, so I'd echo all of Stacey's comments, and then a lot of it was perception and how people felt in this situation. And I think that, we did have to, kind of physically redistribute our workplace. So our workplace is essentially a large open area with tables which produce a sequential line of activities, and people work in pods. And so the first weekend after they started closing the province, we had some of our managers go in and rearrange all the area, and so that we could maintain that 6-foot distancing. And as things were changing, and literally on a daily, I kind of somewhat look forward to, but also dreaded that weekly or that daily update from the province, because what's going to change now? What are we going to have to update and adjust to? And so so we were able to do that, but there was still a lot of apprehension in our workforce. And so we have about 200 employees work at our site in Woodside, and about 60% of those were able to work from home. So we very quickly, literally in 48 hours, transitioned from about 200 people coming to site on a given day to about 120 of those transitioning to full-time work from home. And so there was definitely, communication was a big challenge. Our production workforce also doesn't regularly access a computer, so it had to be conversations that had to happen. And how do we even do that? Normally we would have a daily or a weekly briefing. Couldn't do that anymore to get 8 people together in one spot. What does 5 people mean? What does 5, can we still operate? The confusion around the manufacturing sector being designated as essential but employees saying, well, I get a doctor's essential. How am I, making sauna boys, making sonar systems essential? But we internally in the management team talked about, do we shut down? Is that the right answer for us? Because we are concerned about our employee safety, and we're concerned about our employee safety. But we very quickly, I think, got into a spot where we felt confident and comfortable that we could operate safely, meet all of the requirements, and continue to operate and meet the needs of our customers.
Yeah, that's great. And somehow bringing that sense of normalcy probably did help alleviate a little bit of the anxiety for people as well, right? When you can start to feel and see that you can safely congregate with people in small numbers and at a safe distance, and that can help to alleviate some of that anxiety. And we even here as a small organization of only 8 or 10 people on our team, the resource challenge of everyone needing laptops. So thank goodness a team like ours, we all have laptops already, so we can all safely work from home. But it's something I've heard from many organizations that if everyone's going to work from home, all of a sudden everyone needs laptops and everyone needs access to Zoom. And I wish I'd been a shareholder in Zoom before all this happened, because I'd be retired by now. But in your respective businesses, by their nature, they require the sequenced handling of materials. I mean, that's what advanced manufacturing is all about. And so, where you require many people to actually be physically on site, they can't do that from home. That becomes a real challenge. And I'm curious about, some of how you handled that, specific changes that you might have made in terms of retooling your operations or retooling your sites. James, did you want to start us off?
Yeah, so like I said, we physically, so essentially our work site is a number of tables that are set up in the employees put together the pieces of the sauna buoys or the towed array sonars. And so we did actually rearrange those desks. We also looked at scheduling issues. So we had to stagger breaks and lunches so that we didn't have too many people going to lunchroom or certain areas at any one given time. We even got to the point where we had to look at, procedures for how they exit the building. So, making sure that the people were because everybody leaves at around the same time. So making sure people were able to kind of continue to maintain that distancing as they were leaving the building. We actually had one of our employees who's quite the seamstress, and she spent about a week or two sewing masks. And so she sewed about 500 masks, which we were able to distribute to our employees to use if they chose to wear masks. Things like that were all things that we did. Enhanced cleaning. We've got some staff cleaners as well as contract cleaners, so increasing that service. I'm sure us, like everybody else, can't get their hands on disinfectant wipes if you try to. So what are the different options around those? And so it was a lot happening very quickly. But I think and communication again was one of the key important things. And so having pretty much daily walk-arounds with the employees, talking about what we're doing, talking about all the things that we're putting in place to protect their safety, what we need them to do to make sure that they maintain that, partnering with our union around that. And so I think a lot of that was really helpful, but there were still, still people had, concerns and valid concerns. But I think, a lot of what we heard from our employees is that they got to a comfort level, say, I trust my coworkers and I know they're doing all the things they need to. I'm more concerned going to the grocery store because I don't know what the general public's doing. So we were, I think, able to build that culture internally around, focusing on what you need to do to be able to work safely here and making sure that everybody follows rules.
Yeah, and that comfort level is an interesting point because as we kind of get comfortable with the new reality around us and the people that we're seeing every day, we do find ourselves moving a bit closer to them, and we do find ourselves forgetting some of the rules and trying to maintain that same level of vigilance, I guess I'll call it. That's a tough thing, and and then you find those comfort levels at either end of that spectrum or that continuum of some who are hysterical at one end and overly comfortable at the other end, and one is being seen as being inconsiderate and the other as being perhaps overly hysterical, and trying to balance these different comfort levels within a workplace and be following the rules and regulations. That's a tough thing. It's a personality thing, and it's also a comfort level thing as well. Stacey, what about your perspective on some of the steps that you've taken to resume operations?
Well, when back in late March, when the state of emergency was declared, we soon thereafter, we suspended industrial operations, which means primarily all our trades folks. But we maintained the staff, but about 50% of that staff began working from home. And the primary reason for that was because we had to figure out what working in our specific environment meant in that state of emergency, right? Because we work in such confined and closed and the nature of what we do. So that gave us, that in retrospect, that gave us the time and space to really start steamrolling all these things that we needed to do, or we thought we needed to do, right? To lead it, so like similar to James, what they did at Ultra is, enhanced cleaning, lots of signage. Like you can't walk anywhere across our shipyard without seeing a sign about how many people in a room, where to walk, where not to walk, cleaning. If you use a microwave in a kitchenette, you have to clean that microwave and sign that you cleaned it, right? So just signs everywhere. A lot of personal responsibility on the employees. We restricted face-to-face meetings, but if and when you used a conference room for anything, and it was within their COVID occupancy rate, the occupants of that room had to clean it and you had to sign, right? So a lot of that. We introduced things and we continue to introduce a lot of screening. So a health questionnaire, we do temperature screening now across every ISI site, digital and tablet form, right? So we do that across every site. We screen our contractors. So again, a lot of those things that we do, right? I think two things that worked for us, again, in retrospect, was because where our company wanted to go, where our president wanted to go was he wanted to show the workforce that we're always pushing the yardstick as opposed to following it, right? So there was two groups that were created. And so there was an Irving Shipbuilding senior leader group. I was part of this group, and it was the ISI COVID steering group, right? All senior people, about a half a dozen to 8 people. And we met pretty much daily, all right? Zoom, Teams meeting. And that's all we did was we formulated options, alternatives, mitigations for the president and his leadership team. That gave us a lot of opportunity. The other group was at the JD Irving level, right? I was also part of a JD Irving similar type group, and we met, several times a week. And again, when you have that type of breadth of experience across all the JD Irving companies, you just can't help but pick up ideas, right? Mm-hmm. So in retrospect, those two senior level groups to talk about measures, mitigations, what works, what didn't work, all that stuff was key. So now where we are is we're just refining things that we've been putting in place for 10 weeks, as opposed to opening up and trying to put everything in place at once. Yeah. I think that's probably been a big thing for us, right?
Yeah, and probably an easy way for people to adapt as well, right? Rather than more big change.
And when people come back to work, what we're hearing now is, so when people come back to work, they haven't been there for 8 to 10 weeks, so they don't know what to expect, and they're coming in and it's almost eyes like they're not expecting to see what they see, the signs, the cleaning schedules, the temperatures, the questionnaires, the communications. So what it does for us, it really puts an immediate sense of confidence with the workforce that we're working hard, we're doing our best, and we care, right? So it gives that immediate sense of confidence, and to your point about what other people are doing down, they feel unsafe in a grocery store, right? Yeah. So we're hearing now our employees are saying they feel safer in the shipyard than they do at another commercial type venue.
Sure. Yeah. I haven't always felt safe in a grocery store anyways, even just during regular flu season. I think people are pretty freewheeling with their sneezes in regular life. So maybe this will change some of that behavior. Marc-Andre, maybe you could outline some of the steps for sort of retooling to get back to work, because I think there's some confusion about the extent or maybe even just the steps that need to be taken. If you could just walk us through sort of briefly a couple slides around some things to consider.
Oh, do we have this?
I think Kyle's going to share our
I should be able to see it here. Right. All right, you played games over here. Am I going to have to... All right, so I think from a science perspective approach to the virus, the first thing you need to understand how the virus spreads. and then you have to look at groups of protection factors, and then you can run through them and make sure that everything is covered. So and there is some debate about this, and I'm not going to go too much into this. So we use the 6-foot rules because when you cough, so it comes from coughing. 6 feet, if it gets on you, then you can touch it. And it's a hand-to-mouth kind of contact that is the most likely potential route. So that's what we try to that comes from the distancing. Now, science, how good is science? Science is reducing the uncertainty. It doesn't give you a precise answer, and that's from a business perspective. We want a number, 2 or 3. Engineering perspective, science is more broad. So all over Europe, it's 1 meter. Here, it's 2 meters. So why is that? Well, there's different organizations have a different view, and the
Population density comes
yes,
down.
and the actual science behind it is quite old, 1940, 1960s, right? So now we see different things. We've seen some spread through not the biggest droplet, but the smallest droplet that go much further. And now we're talking about 20 feet. But again, it's difficult to explain because now we don't go panic about 20 feet. It's because the smallest particulate, they go further, but they have a smaller viral content. So you need more of the smaller ones. So then somebody came up with the 15 minutes rule for close proximity. Or working, if the room is small, when you reopen your room, it's a good opportunity to review. You know what, we only, these ventilator, do they work? Do they work good? Are they at their best? Is there tuning on it that during these circumstances, maybe in regular time, I want to have some cost saving on the heating, but maybe during COVID, I'm going to increase it. So what's my scale? So you can work from that. So distancing, ventilation, everything that has to do with the airflow. And of course, when you have, so hand to mouth, so don't touch your mouth, don't touch your hand, physical distancing and ventilation, and wear masks to protect the other and all this. And the debate about masks, well, I don't know if I should say this. I felt responsible as a professional about the confusion that there's been around them. Anyway, 6 steps to cover this. So wear a mask to protect if you can't maintain the distance. So if you wear a mask or people around you wear a mask, you have less chance. If people don't wear a mask, you have more chance. And if people are close together, you have more chance. So it's all a statistical thing, right? So basically, we're starting to roll the dice. One of the big impact is traveling. Now, we don't travel from country to country. So we're not at the same risk level now that we were over there, although we will try to come back. So the first thing is the mask. The other thing is the distancing, the room size. So how big is the room? Like here, we could have 6 feet social distancing, but the walls could be here. It would be a higher risk than having this large room that we are here. And when you go outside, there's even a lesser risk. So again, like this discussion about letting the kids play outside is something. So my kids right now, they play outside with their short group of friends. They still see less kids than when they were at school. And we don't play inside, we play outside. So we hope for a nicer day. I always like a nicer day. All right, the other number 4 is about distancing, crowdiness. So of course, taking the bus is something else, and the respirator. Now, I think I'd like to say something about what you guys mentioned about people coming back to work. And I think you did like what I hear is a good job. And I've been very impressed by all the industry that I've been through since. What I tell people is people are listening to the message from the public health director that is clear, strong, stay home. And then suddenly me, because I'm a welder or I'm a professional, I have to go to work. So what do you do? So the task is to create the same level of security when you go to work that if you had stayed at home. And by doing this, you're creating, basically you have your little family, you're creating little family in your workplace instead of having everybody working together, you get the shift twisted and things like that.
Great.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks, Marc-Andre. I should mention that, excuse me, me, if anyone, the viewers that we have online, if you want to send in a question, feel free to type it in the chat, and Kyle will send it to my phone. And I am checking my phone here as we're having our conversation. So, despite all of our great intentions at the beginning of this, I'd love to hear of some of the missteps or some of the, the misinformation that you've been trying to work with, or that you've had to kind of maybe pivot on over the last 13 weeks or so as we've been reacting to the situation. Stacey, did you want to start us off?
That's a good question. I would say from my perspective, I guess it would be probably less missteps than just, the first crack at something was version 1, right? And then we said, oh, okay, that just wasn't. And a couple things that come to mind would be, one of the things we did, sort of one of the philosophies I sort of believe, prepare for the worst, hope for the best kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So, we had plans in place that, if and when, we hoped it would never happen, that we had a positive case, right, within our workforce, right? So what would that look like? Apart from what the provincial health authority would do and how they would interact, that was set up, and we put faith in that, right? But what would we do as a company for our workforce and that sort of thing, right? So we developed a process or a structure. If we had an employee come in and say, I've just tested positive and I've been working here for couple of weeks with everyone, right? What would that look like? What would our process be to address it and get the workforce confidence and keep the confidence, right? So we built a process, and we did a couple trial runs, right? We did a couple tabletop exercises with it, right? And it was interesting that we thought the first crack at that, it was a pretty good process, and we soon found out it was pretty cumbersome. It really wouldn't have worked. Yeah. It would have been painful to go through, right? So that was a good one. I wouldn't, now, after a couple exercises and dry runs through it, we were pretty comfortable with what we had. And I would say that the version 4 was vastly different than the version 1, right? And so that was one of them. I think, I'd say a misstep, but was the daily, provincial, national, international stay-at-home message. Yeah. And what we were doing, somewhat to what Mark's comment, right, is how did we, that was a constant communication, constant messaging. The daily, stay at home, don't go anywhere, but we're operating. Yeah, how do you reconcile that in your mind? And that communication for us was a daily. Our communications director, he is an all-consuming job, right? Yeah. And then maybe the other thing, I don't know if it would be a misstep, but it was just accessing of things, hand sanitizer, masks, cleaning products. What do we use? These aren't available. Let's, so that was an all-consuming event. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Stacey. Yeah, because I often find, for small organizations, you can learn as well from what the advice of others of what worked, but also from what didn't work, right? So that they don't repeat some of those steps as well. James, what about from your perspective?
I mean, one of the things I think we did well, which was a decision made early, is that we would follow the recommendations of the Nova Scotia and Canadian governments, and maybe not ignore everything else, but that would be where we would get our guidance from, because we had a number of situations where employees Googled something and they came up with this great study from the University of New Westminster or something like that said not 6 feet, it should be 25 feet and stuff.
Oh my goodness.
And they're bringing this forward to us, and what do you think about this? We're like, that's great. We will follow, and that became very early on our mantra, say this is what we're following, right? What Dr. Strang tells us to do and what Prime Minister Trudeau tells us to do, that's what we will follow, and we will build all of our programs and policies and programs around that. When that changes, we will adjust. Masks is a good example, right? The US and other countries were strongly recommending masks, whereas Canada was not, and that evolved over time. As that evolved, our policy around that evolved as well. So that was, I think, good. And in the beginning, it was definitely bumpy because people, sure, it looks like a really reputable study that you've got there, but I'm not a doctor, and so that was, I think, one thing that we did well. The procedure around what happens if you have a positive test. It took us probably, well, I know it was March 30th when we issued our procedure, because for the first 2 weeks, everything was changing. Every day something would change. As we write it, it's like, oh no, well now they've changed that, so we need to adjust this. The one thing I think we didn't get till version 2 was what happens when someone is asked to go for a test. So they haven't actually tested positive, what is the process when someone goes for a test? And so the first time that happened for us, I think from a communications perspective, we probably could have handled that a little better. We definitely got that direct feedback from our workforce. And luckily, we're very lucky no one in our workforce ever tested positive and still hasn't tested positive. But even someone being asked to go for a test, that causes a lot of concern, uncertainty, and our approach was to say, well, until we have a positive test, we aren't taking any further action around that. But as soon as that person goes for a test, we do wipe down the area and everything like that, but we aren't going to, essentially empty out our workplace, because that's essentially what would happen if someone in our workplace had a positive test, because it's pretty hard to discern, who that person did and didn't have contact in even a 10,000 square foot facility. So if we did have a positive test, we would likely have essentially kind of had to send everybody home for 2 weeks kind of thing. So,
and balancing that need to inform people and keep people up to date with not creating unnecessary worry, right? And anxiety, right? That's because there's so many variables. Obviously, the health factor is a key variable that we're all trying to keep in mind, but also it's the mental health as well, right? And
Absolutely.
yeah. Marc-Andre, how about you? Any key missteps that you've seen kind of generally organizations making?
Yeah, I don't know if I would call them misstep. I think I would call them steep learning curve sometimes, and some pay the price by putting too much into something or not enough into this one. So I recognize that strategy of, we had an emergency, we had to do something, let's do something. It doesn't have to be perfect, let's keep moving. As long as you keep that mindset of continuous improvement, it will get you somewhere, and you're going to do better, right? So what you did might not be perfect, but it's better than doing nothing at all. And as you get along, you get being aware of all these change and all these buzz that you talked about, all these science is difficult to follow, and to, even though you say, you can say to a workers, I'm following this guideline, you still believe that article from West is true.
Yes.
So you gotta have good. And that's a place where an industrial hygienist, you give him a call and you do something. I had a customer that called me about a respirator. Can I use the Chinese respirator? He didn't know where to go to, where to start. A few phone calls from myself, because I know this world. It was fixed. Yes, you can do it, but be careful. It might not work. And actually, it did not work because they don't fit very well, right? We have a different. But list is healthcare in terms of not stocking enough stuff. We're gonna have to rethink about a disposable respirator. Cannot be really your standard when you start having that quantity and people changing them 8-10 times a day. So that you create. And that fault created a fault in the recommendation for the public respirator. And that's one of the reasons why I believe that the public health were not recommended respirator for the population, because they were scared that they would steal the respirator from the healthcare. But if you plan properly, people should have been recommendation of people respirator much earlier than what we did. That's my belief in that sense. And you have to understand that you're not wearing recognized respirator. You're wearing respirator that grandma made, which is good. It offers a protection, but it's not an insurance of protection like a standardized. And in order for this to work, you have to have like 90% of the population wearing it. So I have a little head count. And when you go to the grocery store, yes. Essential service grocery store, I think there's been failures there too. I was really concerned. I came back home after the first time I went to the grocery store, that they put some finicky thing there. They improved since then. I said, that's not working. We need a standard. I sat at my home, I did a drawing. Next day, there's a new publication for the Institute of Research in Quebec that was actually doing my drawing. And I said, great. I tried to forward it to my grocery store, and it was not working, right? And they ended up with having to close the grocery store twice. So there's lots of examples like this. And the consideration, I'm sure you guys did, but the consideration about the impact of having the school closure. Mm-hmm. People's life, people that have children, their life is organized around this, and you have to be able to be flexible. So yes.
Great. Thanks, Marc-Andre. And I think when we were doing our tour around Cove earlier, you talked about having patience with this, because As you say, it's an iterative process. We're not going to get it right the first time, and especially as things are changing, but having the patience to kind of work it through and with all, of course, with all the best intentions. I think maybe I'm the last optimist around, but I really did believe that this was temporary. And every 2 weeks I thought, okay, it's only 2 weeks more. And I kept telling my kids that 2 weeks more. I think I've maybe started to shift out of denial and come to terms with the fact that we have COVID in our lives for probably at least the midterm anyways, at least another 6 months or maybe longer. And I'm curious to know what some of the changes are that you've made that you'll actually continue with or keep even post-COVID. Maybe I'll throw that question out to James first.
Yeah, so I think one of the big ones for Ultra, and when I talk in this case, when I talk about Ultra, I'm talking about Ultra, the global company. So we operate in the United Kingdom, in Australia, in the United States, and Canada. And I think for us, this was an eye-opening experience of what we could do remotely. And so we had, like I said, about 60% of our workforce transition from coming to the office every day to never coming into the office. And within a week, we were able to quite efficiently do that by kind of expanding how we use Zoom meetings and things like that. And so I think that I know that is something that will continue. So we will work over the next bit to kind of transition from a model of having all of our employees with a desk on site to likely some employees who may be full-time working from home, and some employees with the options of partially working from home and partially working on site. And that's also changing how we view our facilities. So we're about to embark on a facility modernization project, and we'll like to look at that very differently as to do we need a desk for everybody? And we likely don't. And so what does that look like from a collaborative workspace kind of approach? So that would be one thing. I think the other thing too then is communication was a learning for us as well. How we communicate, when we can't get everybody together in a room all at once. So I think we have some learnings with that, and we'll, especially with our production workforce, who, like I said, don't access email on a regular basis. The daily walk-arounds and talking to people in small groups was a really effective way to talk to people and get feedback versus getting 60 or 70 people together on the production floors.
Yeah, and when communication's only kind of going in one direction out to people, it leaves it open to interpretation as well, right? And that's where being able to actually talk through the communication, it can help with some of the misinterpretation of information. Yeah, Stacey.
I would say a couple things for us would be no particular order. Training. I mean, there's always people are always looking for more efficient ways to deliver training, right? And there's virtual and distance learning, those sort of things. I would say in our case, we've really we have and we continue to really up our game in terms of we can deliver training virtually and still achieve in many respects the same result, the quality and the quantity, right, of people. So that's been a thing. Like we're really fighting on that, right? Yeah. Virtual training. I would say from a communication perspective, I mean, our company's that's a sort of a standing, for lack of a word, that's a standing ethos, right, in terms of lots of communication. But I would say one of the things our president introduced through the last number of weeks was that we do regular town halls face-to-face with our workforce, right, in various venues. But the president introduced virtual town halls. And even, admittedly, I didn't think they'd be as a success as they were. Like it's something like this where he sits with a number of questions that he's received from the workforce, and he answers them, in a very coordinated fashion, right? I think the virtual town halls, I don't see that going away. I still see the company, both at the Irving Shipbuilding and JD Irving level. One of the things they believe in is leadership by presence. So you got to be out there, right? Yeah. You just can't lock yourself in a cubicle or an office. So that'll always be there. That's critical. But I think the virtual town hall type thing that our president introduced was really effective, and we're going to continue that, right? And I guess the last one would be, I just think, like you, I was always looking for the 2 weeks from now it'll be over. 2 weeks it'll be over, right? Yeah. But I'm like, I don't think it's there. But I think one of the residual effects from this is going to be people having a greater sense of when they're in an office or a kitchenette or whatever, like the cleaning piece. I think there's going to be a residual, just a residual awareness of that people do things like that after themselves. I just think that's going to happen. Because I could see it now,
So.
well,
Although I haven't seen the effects of that in my home yet. My kitchen is just as much of a mess every time I walk into it as before, but I'd like to think that. Stacey, I did want to just touch on one point around training. And I think the virtual training, it works for some. It's not great for most though. And I say that as an educator. So it can replace some components, but when I'm thinking about like apprentices who you have on site, how do you replicate that hands-on side-by-side learning from a mentor? How do you replicate that?
So you're right. Sure, that's very different, right? Then that type of thing, and probably in all respects, if not most all respects, can't be replicated virtually, right? So what that means for us is a lot smaller class sizes and a lot more classrooms.
Yeah.
That's what that has meant. Quite simply, instead of doing it, say, just hypothetically with 15 welders in a space in our welding lab, we might have 4 welders in that welding lab, and the other 10 or 11 or 12 are elsewhere doing a similar type training. But that's effective like that.
Yeah, and we can kind of extrapolate that conclusion out to even our schools where we're seeing that, where they're looking at smaller class sizes for the benefit of the kids, but also just to avoid contamination and cross contamination. Marc-Andre, what about you? What would you love to see? Some of the changes that we've made during this period. What are a couple changes that you'd love to see continue on even post COVID to maybe prevent a second wave or just to prevent a similar situation in the future?
Yeah, I think there's a consciousness that like the worst thing can happen. We always this conscious about the long-term health effect of things, that maybe it's in the future, what is not immediate, that, well, we just cross our finger and keep going. We have to change our mindset about that. So there's this one, because we could think about the end of COVID, but we cannot think about the end of viruses. Yeah. So let's say that lucky us, September comes up, we don't have the peak that is predicted, everything's good, we resume business, well, there'll be something else coming in. So we need to learn from this. And I think this, I don't want to be the bad one, but we could talk about 3 years about this thing. Yeah. Basically, the end of it is a vaccine developed, distributed, and all of this. So even in the best scenario of that. But could there be a normal in between that we could live just by increasing our level of consciousness? And what we need to do is to find the issues between the emergency state. We're not ready, something happening. We don't understand that virus. It spreads way faster than we ever thought a virus could. With all this international connection that we have, that hit us. We had to stop. Now, probably with what we know, what we're doing now, we wouldn't have to stop. Or are we ready for not stopping with the same kind of data that we would get at first? Ready of the vaccine. So I think we need to have an organization that has level. So you have emergency, vaccine, and in between at least 3 levels where you say, we're going to continue here. Here we get the next step, we're gonna start loosening up things, and here we'll be close to normal, even though we're not perfect. So we need to define this a little bit better. The public health director of Nova Scotia is not ready to work or to define those, from what I understand from him. Other legislation have done it more. I like it, gives them flexibility. I think at this stage we're still not 100% sure that we fully understand what we're dealing with. So. Flexibility. So if you present your plan for reopening for COVID, your plan should not be close, open. Your plan should be close. I do this up to this stage, I do this up to this stage, and I do this up to this stage. Because some people like to work with people. Yeah. Some people like to touch people. Yeah. I don't want to live in a world where somebody's going to be unhappy because by some accident I touched them. So when are we comfortable?
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. I see maybe I had a few questions come in from the audience, and one of them is a very practical question, and I'll throw it open to anyone who wants to respond. The question is, how are organizations tackling bathroom cleaning? Is it up to employees to fully clean after each use? How are you handling that? And that, and I know here we've got a two-person occupancy in the washroom. We can handle that in a small, with a small population of people in this building, but for example, James with you, or even Stacey with you, when you've got possibly 100 people working in a space, how do you manage that?
So we have our cleaning contractors who handle that, and I think a lot of it does boil down to, because what I learned from this process is there's a lot that an individual can do to keep themselves from contracting the virus, i.e. washing your hands. And so I think I know I wash my hands more than I ever have probably the rest of my life in the last 8 or 10 weeks. And so I think, all of those precautions that are put in place help individuals avoid contracting the virus, even if they happen to have come in contact with it. If you follow all of the things that you're supposed to do, I think it pretty much it protects you in a lot of cases. So we didn't so much do anything different than what we've done in the past. We cleaned the bathrooms more often, but we didn't ask individuals to clean the bathrooms themselves.
There is some basic tricks, it's the frequent contact surfaces that is the most concern. So every time somebody opens the door to go in the bathroom, well, if you can set it up so you leave the door open, it's better. You have less contact there, and you can reduce this. You can have lots of towels at the entry, so the frequent touch. But I think it's you inform people, but I think at the end of the day, the best practice is to have someone that is dedicated to go around at a set frequency. I think that's what works.
Great. Stacey, anything to add?
Yeah, so what we did, so with the washing, we did a number of things. So, because we had, quite a large workforce, theoretically 2,100-ish, apart from the suspension of ops. So a couple of things. First, right off the bat, we increased the cleaning frequency, right? Instead of once a day by our contract cleaners, twice a day. So we made them go to the bathrooms twice a day and clean them. Second to that, we literally locked a number of bathrooms down. So we reduced, even though we put more people in certain bathrooms, we reduced the resource of cleaning staff, right? So they could focus on the few that we did use. Thirdly, we basically, for lack of a better word, we taped off certain sinks and urinals and stalls. You couldn't use them.
Yeah.
Right? You could not use them. So we didn't want 2, 3 people in that bathroom. All right. So 2 people in the bathroom, there was only one sink open, one stall, 1% of it outside. So we taped them off. In addition to the increasing the cleaning frequency, we also we put a sign on every bathroom where it had to be signed every time it was cleaned. And then what we did is we added an inspection criteria. So then we had people who went around to every single washroom every day, and made sure that it was signed. And if it wasn't signed, we assumed it wasn't clean. We shut that bathroom down, and it might have been cleaned, but just it wasn't signed, right? So we did stuff like that. Yeah.
Great. And another interesting question has come up here, because really what we're talking about is kind of 3 things. It's around addressing comfort levels, compliance, but also ease, because as Stacey said, you don't want your solutions to be so cumbersome that it makes it really difficult to even come in and do the work that you're doing. And so, once you've met those things, what do you do when you still have an employee who refuses to come into work? How are you handling that? Or what's your advice to handle that? Who wants to start us off?
I can start off. So I think, part of it is understanding. I think this was unprecedented times. People had varying degrees of comfort and concerns from a range of people who may have had, been immunocompromised and needed one level of understanding and comprehension, to people who just plain were very uncomfortable and anxious. And so we started off, I think, giving a lot of flexibility and to the point where, if you're not comfortable coming in, and if you're so anxious about this that it's causing that much stress, then you can stay up. We wouldn't necessarily pay them, but we gave people that option. And we also put in place, a certain amount of paid leave for folks. If they had to go through the testing process, then we would make sure that people were paid, because you had to isolate for 14 days if you kind of been termed potentially come in contact with someone who goes through the testing process. So part of our goal with that was that we didn't want people to push themselves to come in. We kind of relax some of our sick leave procedures where, we might, after so many days, we want to bring a doctor to know. Well, obviously the province would allow us to do that anyway, but we were already kind of saying, okay, we will give people additional flexibility so that they can feel comfortable to do the things that they need to do to be safe at work. And that additional, so it's about 10 days of paid leave for circumstances related to COVID. That included some of the childcare challenges that people were facing, included if you had to go for testing and things like that. So I think that gave people a lot of comfort that if they got it, if they were in a scenario that they needed to not be able to come into work, they were able to do so. And so I think at our peak, we had 7 of our employees who were, uncomfortable for an extended period of time coming back to work, or we've only got 1 who continues to be off, and that person, has a reason to be off. So.
Okay, thanks, James. Stacey?
Yeah, James, pretty much everything James said, all those HR type initiatives, right? That we did all those, right?
Yeah.
But I think the key takeaway for me, James led off with saying, trying to understand what the concern is, right? Because the way we approached it was like, what's causing the anxiety? Or if you're not comfortable coming back to work, like, what is it? And because we believe once we understood that, there was it would be pretty difficult or pretty rare that we wouldn't be able to navigate a solution. That's how we understood that, right?
Yeah.
Some people could be very definitive in here's why I'm not comfortable.
Yeah.
I have, pre-existing conditions or like that. Like those are you can address those. And there was a few that it was just, I'm just not comfortable. Just because answer, right? And even then we would try to, how do we fix that? Like what would make you comfortable? And we had just examples, right? Someone said, I want 2 masks. I want to wear 2 masks. It's like, okay, I don't know if I'm not a health practitioner. I don't know if it provides double the protection. But if it eases your anxiety and makes you comfortable coming to work, well, then we'll do that. We believe there was very, very few ways that we could not navigate an employee to a comfort level.
Yeah.
But we believe that, right? And that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Marc-Andre, anything to add to that?
No, not much. I think I'll go with the
Yeah.
HR expert here.
I have seen other people with the 2 masks on, and I have wondered about that because I've tried to wear the mask and I overheated and ended up with the mask in my eyes and I touched my face more than I ever have. For me, it wasn't the right solution and it didn't help my comfort level at all. But I guess having that available for people and that can ease their concern.
There is something about that. I don't know if that's the case here, but I was watching TV and I saw this doctor, emergency doctor. He's got his N95. And he got a surgical mask on top. Right?
Oh.
And I had to think about it, and then I figured it out, right? It's because in an emergency situation, you don't want the person to contaminate the patient. That's why you use surgical mask. And then you have the N95 that protects you. Yeah. But if you have an N95 with a valve, it doesn't protect the other one.
Oh,
so all she had left was an N95 left, and then she put a surgical mask on top, and that covered both sides of the story. So imagine that flexibility. I think flexibility is the best approach to these things.
That's great. Yeah. We're coming towards the end of our time here together, and I wonder if maybe we could just share a few final thoughts. Final advice on for others who are looking to reopen or looking for new measures to help them bring back more people. Advice or any final thoughts that you haven't had a chance to mention yet. Stacey, did you want to start us off?
I guess sort of final thought sort of thing would be, Mark made a comment earlier about, this is a worst case scenario.
Yeah.
This happened, right? And it's probably going to happen again. I think if people just sometimes realize in that kind of event, there's no playbook. Like there's plans, but if you've never gone through a pandemic, your plan that you produced might be good, but unless you've gone through a pandemic, it's going to be version 1, right? And just accept that, right? There's no playbook. And extraordinary times, extraordinary circumstances, right? And I think that's one thing, right? There's not a playbook for everything. And if you don't have that playbook, it means you haven't not done anything wrong, right? I think that's one thing. I think the other thing would be, don't be satisfied with the status quo. Version 1, don't be satisfied with version 1. If you put something in place and don't take it personally, but if you put in something in place, a procedure, a process, a mitigation, it works today, but if it doesn't work, make it better tomorrow. Don't be satisfied with the status quo. Always be trying to fix it, or make it better, right? And then the other thing is, you can't change behavior overnight, right? You cannot change behavior overnight. You know, people would come back to work, especially in the early stages, and we would hear complaints, right? I saw two people within 5 feet of each other. Or, you know, I was guilty. I'm a interpersonal guy. I want to touch people, you know, and we say, well, that's a behavioral, that's a cultural thing. We're just not used to that. That'll come, but it won't come overnight. And, you know, now we're seeing just a natural tendency. But the first couple of weeks, you know, people had to help people understand that it's just we're changing our behavior.
Yeah.
Like we really are, right? You know, you mentioned it, James, right? Behavior change doesn't happen overnight.
It doesn't, and
Yeah.
especially if it's, you know, if you've been doing it for 50 years,
Yeah.
right? It's hard
Yeah.
to change who you are.
Yeah.
That becomes a very difficult thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, James.
Yeah, I think so. I think I've mentioned it, but I'll just mention it again. I think you can't communicate too much in these scenarios, and I think it's, you know, the having people, employees, when they come into the work site, having a clear understanding of what the policies and procedures and how the company is supporting them as they go through this process, both with, you know, the protections that are in place and, you know, the what if scenarios, what if something happens, what if someone tests positive. I think all that provides the employees with comfort and hopefully the ability to come in and say, I feel okay coming into work today. It's not going to be a distraction for me. And so I think that's, you know, you can't communicate too much. And so the other one too, I think, is as we kind of return to this new normal, I think is what I'll call vigilance. So I think it's difficult. I'm sure I'm guilty of it. I know we've had to kind of increase our conversations in our workplace to say things are getting better, but we are still focused on 6 foot distancing. We are still focused on regular washing of the hands, of all these precautions in place. They do still need to continue. You know, so that we don't get another flare, so that we don't, you know, we've been successful in the 10 weeks not having to enter our workplace. Let's keep that going. And so it's difficult, right? Because everybody wants to get back to the normal. Everybody wants to get back to, you know, being able to go out and go to a restaurant and all these things, and in the workplace being able to spend more time with the people that you would have in more close proximity. But it's just that vigilance, and that, you know, continue to remind people of what the precautions are and why they're there. That it's about their safety, and it's about it's not just something that the policy the companies put out there. It is about everybody's safety.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the communication is a really important point, because as much as we are communicating and talking about what we're doing in our own workplaces, part of that communication is also about addressing what they're reading and hearing online and through other sources of media that is sometimes helpful information, sometimes very unhelpful, and misinformation as well. And, you know, but I've found that, you know, we spend some of our time addressing that as well. And I think both of your points around signage is important. I've personally never been a big fan of signs. I don't pay attention to them maybe as much as I should, but I have found that the signage has been very helpful for me, because, you know, like Stacey, you know, I stand close, I touch, and so on. The signage has helped me remember as my comfort level has grown. It's helped remind me of, you know, stay apart, wash, try and push doors open with your elbow. And in that case, I am a fan of the signage. It's a good reminder for me. Marc-Andre, last words?
Maybe I think there's a recognition that we need to bind two things that we're walking along that need to start walking together: the public health authorities and the businesses. So I don't know if you felt this way, but the public health authority is trying to give public health recommendations. But suddenly those public health had to be applied in the workplace. And it's like, oh, well, that works if I stay home, but now it's my workplace that is my home, because I'm in essential services. So I think we need to start that communication. So that type of communication too, I think is important. How scientists communicate, how we communicate uncertainties in clear terms, not to have people that we see something, well, it doesn't mean that it's there yet. We just keep looking. So when's the time to be conscious of a new hazard? When's the time to actually act on that new hazard? And this is outside the science and business field. We get into the philosophical field, right? Yes, also as a society, how do we want to build a new society where we're ready to react to whatever coming at us?
That sounds like a great topic for our next workshop. Thank you very much. Thanks, Marc-Andre and Stacey and James, and thanks everyone who's been watching today. For the first time in my life, I am finishing exactly on time. I appreciate everyone's time here today and enjoy the day. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.